Hi there everybody, Jack here with another video. So, the albums that have changed my life. These are the albums from my formative years. All albums from the ages of about 5 to 18. Because for me, these are the albums that really had an effect on me. These are the albums that buried deep into my psyche, that helped define me as a person, my personality, my haircut, my clothes, my friend group, my politics as I got older, my whole way of being, my whole way of thinking. These are the ones that got to me first. These are the ones that really had an effect. So the first piece of music that I can ever remember listening to, and therefore by default became the most influential album probably that I have ever listened to, was Peter and the Wolf, a Disney album by Prokofiev. I probably listened to that when I was about 4 or 5. It's essentially a piece of classical music, but it was like crack for my developing musical brain. Each of the characters within the story are played by a different instrument, and you can really focus in on these different instruments and follow the thread of the story. So indirectly, this album is responsible for me spending absolutely hours of my life listening to music, spending thousands and thousands of pounds on CDs, records, cassettes, downloads. It's responsible for me boring thousands of people with my incessant music talk. I've probably turned a few people to stone. I've talked their ear off that much about music that they're probably not interested in. And now it's responsible for me getting on YouTube and spreading the gospel amongst other music nerds like yourself. So, on top of that, I would say that Peter and the Wolf by Prokofiev would be my ground zero. It would be my track one, side one. It was me falling down the rabbit hole into a lifelong obsession with music. So I would have been probably preschool when my mum put that album on for me. It's my first memories of music. But when I was about 5, our family were due to move to Canada. I had an aunt and uncle in British Columbia, I think it was Vancouver Island, and we sold our house and we went to move to Canada. But my dad took not well, he got meningitis, and as a result they made the decision to stay in Scotland. So we stayed with my gran for about 6 months before moving to a house in Gourock. And when we moved to the house in Gourock, I had a large basement, and in the basement, all the boxes get stuck down there, all my toys, lots of other bits and pieces from the house, and the record player was down there with all the records. So rummaging around down in the basement amongst those boxes, I found this, and I was immediately drawn to the cover. Such a cool album cover. The Beatles 1967 to 1970, the Blue Album. And on opening it up, I loved the inside gatefold as well. I thought that George looked really cool. And just the photo in general, like this little character here, and the old lady. I'm sure there's Beatles nerds on here who would know who a lot of these people were, or if they've been tracked down. But yeah, I loved the cover. I thought it was really good. And then obviously when you put on the songs, Strawberry Fields Forever, as a young kid, like I immediately grabbed you. Sergeant Pepper's was fantastic. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So yeah, again, just an album that I fell in love with straight away. So as a pre-teen, the Beatles were easily my favourite band. In fact, they were almost like my only band. I had a Beatles chord book. I was learning to play the guitar at the time. And what I used to do is every time I heard a new Beatles song, and if I managed to get a recording of a new Beatles song from a friend or from a friend of my mum and dad's, I would record them onto cassette, and I would take the Beatles chord book, go to the index, and I would tick off the songs. So I wanted to hear all the Beatles songs. So you can see in those pre-internet days, you really had to work to dig out the good stuff. However, there were challengers for the hold that the Beatles had over my pre-teen musical attention, and that was, of course, the Rolling Stones. My dad had Roll Gold, volumes 1 and 2. I used to play them all the time in the car. It was the earlier stuff that I really liked. I liked Come On, Little Red Rooster, Not Fade Away. It was all that kind of early rock and roll R&B stuff that I really gravitated towards. I loved it. And then as I got a little bit older, that mid-period stuff started to appeal to me more, like Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, Standing in the Shadows? And I really liked, obviously, Jumpin' Jack Flash because it had my name in the title. But the Stones as a whole, they just really became them and the Beatles, and it was the only two things that I listened to pre-teen. So when I got to high school, there was another guy who liked the Beatles and the Stones, and it was good to meet up with someone else who liked similar music, because until then, it was only really my mum and dad that I would speak to about music. But we would sit in French class together. Instead of doing our French, we would talk about the Beatles and the Stones. And if he had any songs that I didn't have, then he would record them onto cassette for me, and vice versa. and whenever I got a new Beatles song, I would tick it off in my Beatles chord book. But he also liked the AC/DC, and he tried to get me into AC/DC. But at the time, I don't know, they just didn't do it for me. I do like AC/DC now, but I remember he used to sing the song Big Balls, and that really put me off. I just couldn't get into them at all. He came in another day, and he said to me that there was someone emptying their house on his street, and they'd put a skip out the front of the house, and he'd went around to play football or something on his street, and he said that the guy who was emptying a load of stuff from his house into the skip was putting a load of old vinyl records in the skip, and he'd saved a couple of records, and the records that he'd got off this guy were Snap and All Mod Cons by The Jam. I absolutely loved The Jam, and they were a game changer for me because I realised that there were other bands out there that I could love as much as the Beatles and the Stones. They were melodic, they had great lyrics, they were upbeat, but they were also really aggressive. They sounded more aggressive than the Beatles or the Stones, and they had swearing in their songs, which was cool as a teenager. But yes, so many great songs on here. David Watts, I absolutely loved straight away. Obviously, I wasn't familiar with the Kinks at the time, so I didn't know that that was a Kinks song. I loved Mr. Clean, and that amazingly aggressive bit of swearing in Mr. Clean was cool as a teenager. I loved Billy Hunt as well. It was like almost like a playground chant. We used to chant that in the playground. And A-Bomb in Wardour Street, and obviously Down the Tube Station at Midnight was just brilliant as well. Try to memorise all the lyrics to Down the Tube Station at Midnight. So about a year later, when I was 14, I went away with the Boys Brigade. For those that don't know the Boys Brigade, kind of like the Scouts, but probably more focused on sport. But I went away with them to France for a week's camping in France. And up until that point, I was only interested in football. Really, I played football for the Boys Brigade on a Saturday. I played for my local boys club, the Guruk Yak, on a Sunday. All my free time after school, I spent playing football out in the street. But then when I went on that France camp, that was like a kind of coming of age week away where I did lots of things that I hadn't done before as a 14-year-old. And I remember when we got the bus on the way over, I heard loads of music that I'd never ever heard before. All the older lads were straight to the back of the bus. They had the Get-Up blaster on, and they were blasting out Hallelujah non-stop. And it was loads of music from the Manchester scene, but I remember absolutely loving Hallelujah. Wrote for Luck. They played loads and loads of stuff like Primal Scream, The Charlatans and Spiral Carpets, all the great bands from that period. But I remember really, really loving the Happy Mondays. And when I got back, I got my friend to make up a little tape of different Happy Mondays songs, and I got a copy of Bummed. Yeah, what a cool cover this has. Really, really nice. The inner cover. But yeah, nobody sounds like the Happy Mondays. Nobody sounds like Shaun Ryder. Paul was such a great guitar player as well. They were so funky. Just an absolutely tremendous band. So also on that trip, I received what felt like a gift from God. It was the first time that I ever heard Stone Roses. And to misquote Brian Clough, I wouldn't say that they were my favourite band of all time, but they were definitely in the top one. I loved everything about the Stone Roses debut album. The songs were phenomenal. I was a bad guitar player, but I just loved listening to John Squire. I was getting more interested in the guitar. I loved how fluid he was on the guitar, how inventive. I hadn't heard anybody play the guitar like that before. They looked really cool. They had cool haircuts. I loved their clothes. I loved their attitude. For me, the Stone Roses were like a band for me at my time. As much as I loved the Beatles and the Stones, that was like my mum and dad's music. And the Stone Roses were just like something brand new. It felt like my music at that time, and I was the perfect age for it at 14. So this would have been about 1990, and I loved the whole Manchester scene, and I loved all the other bands that were around at the time, like Jesus and the Mary Chain and Teenage Fan Club and all that kind of thing as well. And I remember going to my local record store in Greenock and picking up a VHS video of Happy Mondays live at the GMEX, and I took it home and put it on, and my mum absolutely hated it. Shaun Ryder was walking about the stage, swigging from a bottle of wine and reading his lyrics off of a piece of A4 paper, and my mum was absolutely disgusted by it. And she took me back to Rhythmic Records and made me get another VHS tape. I ended up getting Magical Mystery Tour on video instead. But if anything, that made me just love the Happy Mondays even more, because when you're 14, you want to be doing the things that your parents don't want you to do, and that made me want to listen to the Mondays and the Stone Roses even more. So to try and keep me on the straight and narrow, round about that time, my mum bought me this, maybe to try and keep me away from nasty bands like the Happy Mondays. But I absolutely loved this. She bought me it on CD, and straight away I just fell in love with the storytelling. And again, it was a game changer for me. I've been a massive, massive Dylan fan ever since hearing this. I had heard Dylan before. My mum and dad had John Wesley Harding on vinyl, and I liked All Along the Watchtower and Pity the Poor Immigrant, but I couldn't really get into the album when I was younger. But with this, I loved the whole story of Hurricane, Romance in Durango, some of their ISIS, all the big, big long songs as well. So, so good. Things like One More Cup of Coffee for the Road. Just an absolutely brilliant album. And that kind of led me down a Dylan rabbit hole till I found this, which would really be the Dylan game changer for me. When I heard this, I just became obsessed with Bob Dylan. How many classic songs are on here? I'm not going to read them out because they're all classic. But yeah, just love this. I love the guitar playing on Tombstone Blues. Probably my favourite song of all times on here, just like Tom Thumb's Blues. But yeah, what a fantastic, amazing album. And yeah, just perfect. So one day when I was walking home from school when I was about 15, I was walking home with this lad who was the year above me in school, and he'd just recently come back from France. He'd been on a school trip, and he told me that he'd bought 3 records when he'd been in France, and he said he would lend me them for a couple of days. So the first one that he lent me was Weird Scenes Inside the Gold Mine, the Doors compilation, and then he lent me this as well. He lent me Ogden's Duck Gone Flake by the Small Faces, and straight away I absolutely fell in love with this album. Absolutely fantastic, especially when you got on to side 2 and you got all that crazy story about the moon by Stanley Unwin. I hadn't really heard anything like that before. There's so many great psychedelic songs on here, like Rolling Over, and that Blue-Eyed Soul of Song of a Baker. I just loved Steve Marriott's vocal style, but they were just such a punchy band, the Small Faces, so tuneful. Then other great songs, Afterglow is just an absolute beauty of a song. I loved Lazy Sunday, the kind of psychedelic nonsense of Lazy Sunday. But the record that he gave me, it was obviously, I think it was a original French press in the old tobacco tin when it had that 4-leaf fold-out vinyl record, the 4-leaf sleeve, which was really, really cool. Unfortunately, I just got this in CD. But he lent me that. That was a game changer. He also lent me, it was the first time I ever heard, the Velvet Underground and Nico, which again, obviously, is just an absolutely tremendous album. I think I repeatedly listened to Venus and Furs and Heroin, a song about heroin. I just never heard a song like that before. And then I love those delicate songs as well, like Sunday Morning, Femme Fatale, and I'll Be Your Mirror, those beautiful songs sung by Nico. Yeah, I've just got this repress with a peeled banana. Yeah, I'd heard the Doors before, and I was starting to get into that kind of West Coast US 60s music, but I hadn't heard anything like this out of New York. It was just something completely different. Loved Lou Reed's voice. I loved those kind of atonal guitar sounds. Mo Tucker's drumming was just brilliant as well. So yeah, this was, like lots of people, I'm sure, this was just a massive life changer for me. So round about that time, I was getting more and more into 60s music. I was soaking up every single bit of 60s music I could hear. And unfortunately, I was pretty immature and thought, oh, if I listen to 60s music, I can't listen to all my old indie records. And I sold loads and loads of indie records. I sold all my Pixies, my Smiths, my Cocteau Twins, Jesus and the Mary Chain, Wonder Stuff. It's crippling to think of that now, that I sold all those brilliant albums. Instead, all I could think of was, did it come out of the 60s? Does it sound trippy? That's what I was into at that time. Now, I listen to everything, but then it seemed like you had to choose one or the other, and yeah, it was really, really stupid. During that summer, my pal went to the US for a month with his parents, and when he came back, he brought back all these cassettes that were really, really difficult to get in the UK by bands that we hadn't heard of before. So some of the bands that he would have brought back, Country Joe and the Fish, Together, absolutely love that album, rock and soul music. I need to get it on vinyl. He brought back Strawberries Mean Love, Strawberry Alarm Clock. I loved that as well. Incense and Peppermints, all that kind of stuff. He also brought back, which was a life changer for me, it was my first time I heard Love, and it was the compilation Love Revisited But straight away, I loved Orange Skies, My Little Red Book. I just loved everything that Love ever did. So the band that I was playing in at that time, we did a cover of Stephanie Knows Who. I had a virtuoso keyboard player who better than anyone else in the town. On top of playing that, we then moved on to the next album, and we used to play Bummer in the Summer. And again, another life changer for me. Love Forever Changes. Such a brilliant album. Starting off with those Mexican horns and Alone Again, or Brian McLean's finest moment. I love the lead guitar playing. That's really heavy fuzz psych lead guitar in A House Is Not a Motel. Then you've got that really sweet old man and those trippy, crazy lyrics about Arthur sitting up on a hill on the red telephone. But yeah, what an amazing, amazing album. It's like Bummer in the Summer. I loved You Set the Scene. It was like almost like a little mini epic. But yeah, along with the Stone Roses debut album, this is my favourite album of all time. And overall, Love are probably my favourite band. So when I discovered the pub when I was about 16, and a lot of my time was now taken up with either playing in the band, playing music, listening to music. I didn't play football any longer. It was all about going out and having a good time. So I actually first started listening to The Who and not realising I was listening to The Who because I had a Monkeys cassette where the cassette said Monkeys written across it. But in fact, it wasn't the Monkeys that was on the cassette. It was a load of Who songs. I think Joined Together was on there, Babo O'Reilly, Squeezebox, and I think it was songs from the Who's Better, Who's Best compilation. But I really started getting into The Who when I started going to the pub, and it seemed just to go well together. Going out drinking at 16 and listening to The Who, the Small Faces, the Kinks, the Stone Roses, that just seemed to go hand in hand. And the first album that I really got into with The Who was probably Odds and Sods. It was like a compilation of B-sides and things that didn't make albums, outtakes. I think a load of the songs came from the Lifehouse sessions. I really, really liked the song Now I'm a Farmer. We changed the lyrics. I won't tell you what we changed them to because they're a bit rude. I also loved Little Billy. It's a brilliant song. It was like used in an anti-smoking campaign. There's a drum fill in Little Billy, which I absolutely loved. So good. Maybe my favourite bit of drumming of all time from Keith Moon. And Glow Girl was a great song as well. But then the album that I really, really got into, along with the film, was Quadrophenia. And yeah, straight away, I Am the Sea sets the tone, but when it kicks into The Real Me and John Entwistle, the aux, starts that bass line in The Real Me, it was just like absolutely phenomenal. All those bass runs and he's like zooming up and down the fretboard. Cut My Hair, such a great song as well. The Punk and the Godfather. Yeah. Bellboy, 515, such a cool song as well. But yeah, this is a repress. It's got that whole story in here with all the pictures and stuff. But yeah, I love the movie as well. I know the soundtrack to the movie is a little bit different. It's got some alternate songs on here, but yeah, it's just absolutely top class. Just like The Who were probably the ultimate band for just like four absolute virtuoso musicians. You know, I can't think of really a better bass player than John Entwistle. Keith Moon, just a phenomenal drummer. And then just how much energy Entwistle put into his guitar playing. Roger Daltrey, obviously a brilliant singer as well. So yeah, really, that was a game changer for me as well, The Who. So when I left school, I went through to Napier University in Edinburgh. And I didn't last long at university, I only lasted a year. But it was long enough to develop a real love of psych music because I used to go to this club that used to play lots of US garage nuggets from the 60s, lots of psych. And I got to know the DJ pretty well there, and he introduced me to loads and loads of new stuff. So he would have been the one that introduced me to the 13th Floor Elevators, to the Beau Brummels, to the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band, lots and lots of stuff like that. But the big one that he introduced me to was Moby Grape's debut. So I've shown this before, but yeah, this is a real life changer for me. Absolutely loved this album when I heard it. I was obsessed with this album. And when I was talking earlier about boring people with music talk, anybody who hadn't heard this album, which was lots of people at that time, I would bore them as much as I could with how great the album was. And because nobody I spoke to really knew about this, it kind of felt like buried treasure. It felt like I was the only one that knew about it. But yeah, it was just so brilliant. You know, there's so many amazing songs on here. The songwriting's phenomenal. You've got like soul sounding songs like Mr. Blues or Fallen You, Come in the Morning, and then those amazing acoustic kind of ballads like 805, that amazing finger picking guitar, Naked If I Want To, sitting by my window, and then songs that really drive forward like Omaha, Changes. Yeah, what a band Moby Grape were. This is definitely their finest moment. So there we go, a load of the albums that were definitely life changers for me during my most impressionable time. These are all albums that I've loved right through my life, and I could never imagine stopping listening to, but I missed out loads as well. There's loads of honourable mentions. The Lads' debut album is one of my favourites of all time. Surfer Rosa by the Pixies, Doolittle as well by the Pixies. Another big one for me would be Lou Reed's Transformer and Hunky Dory by David Bowie. They're all brilliant albums, but you can't show them all. So these would all be albums that I listened to before I was 18 years of age. The albums that I listened to later, while I don't feel that they were life-changing, those albums just kept me sane. Until the next time, see you later.